I just finished watching the season 2 finale of Heartbreak High, and it brought me to tears. But this is going to be a spoiler free video, so hello, welcome. I'm Adeline, and this is Adeline Reacts. For those of you who don't know, April is Autism Acceptance Month, Autism Awareness Month. Could just shorten it to Autism Month if you want. This month is all about celebrating autistic people, celebrating autistic stories, celebrating diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just making the world a safer space for autistic people, a space where they don't feel marginalized or harassed. So I thought it was the perfect opportunity to talk about one of my favorite shows, Heartbreak High, and its portrayal of autism in the character of Quinni. This is one of my favorite shows, like I just said. And Quinni in particular is a character very near and dear to my heart. Sorry if I get emotional during this. That season finale really got me, so now I'm just like very emotional about the show. But I have autism, and Chloé Hayden was one of the first young women in the autism internet world that I really saw and had a representation of what autism in girls could look like. Before I knew I was autistic, I had this one idea of autism. It wasn't just her. It was a lot of other autistic YouTubers as well, and social media influencers who I was able to look at and be like, oh, I'm not actually so different from them after all. After thinking that autism was this very dividing thing, there's a big gap in between the two. So I just wanted to put that up front because I already had a connection to this character before I watched the show. I knew that Chloé Hayden was going to be acting in a Netflix series. I did not realize that she was going to be one of the main characters. I thought she was just going to be a side character, so I was so excited when I saw that she was part of the main cast and started watching and seeing how prominent her storylines were. That was really surprising, and just great to see. Warms my heart. So today I'm going to be breaking down her character and just overall what I think the impact of this is or can be on the autistic community going forward and what it's been doing now. I know I'm not the only one who has looked at her character before and talked about it, especially as an autistic person. I'm not the only one who did that, but it's Autism Acceptance Month, so this is a little treat, and I'm trying out a new format of video on my channel. I'm sorry, I don't know how I'm structuring this. I really hope this comes out as coherent, cohesive. I feel like the words that are coming out of my mouth aren't the way that I'm expecting the video to be, so my apologies if this is all over the place or if I seem like I'm talking monotone, which I shouldn't have to apologize for. That's what Autism Month is all about, right? Anyways. So, I tried making this video yesterday, but I'm gonna scrap most of it, and primarily use this one because my thoughts were all over the place in the last one. I was stammering over my words, pausing for long periods of time, and I didn't feel like going in and editing it to make sense. So instead, I came up with an outline for the video so I actually know what the hell I'm talking about. Long story short, I am thankful to Chloé Hayden for just being herself on the internet and showing people what it's like to live unapologetically and not be ashamed of who you are. I love this show, Quinni aside, and I think they did a good job with her character, but we're gonna get into that. So the way I'm gonna break this down is introducing you to Heartbreak High, just a very general description. Then I'm gonna get into, general description of Quinni, a lot of her personality traits, and the ways that they portray her autism. And then we're going to get into a little bit more of plot specifics for season 1 and season 2. I've picked out a couple storylines from each one that I'm going to talk about. For most of them, probably all of them, I'm going to try to talk about them generally and not assign names to other characters in case it's spoilery. I'm going to try to make it as spoiler free as possible, but at the same time, if you feel like you don't want to watch, the season 2 section because it might spoil things for you, or you don't want to figure out like who is involved in what plot, etc., etc., you can skip over that, and same with season 1. So, Heartbreak High, an Australian teen drama, Netflix original. It is a spin-off of, from what I understand, a drama, like a teen drama from the 1990s that had the same name. It follows a group of year 11 students at Heartbreak High in Sydney, Australia, as they're navigating life, including sex, relationships, social pressures, trauma, and learning from their mistakes. Some of the prominent themes in season 1 are healthy communication, consent, respect of others, taking responsibility for your actions, healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms. They also started to scratch the surface of the disparity between like the different societal expectations for different genders. They get a lot further into that in season 2. One main through line in season 2 is talking about social ideologies, how those ideas get popularized and indoctrinated. Season 2 also covers themes like what it means to change, what it means to become a good person, how to deal with conflict in relationships, letting the past go, and relying on each other and teamwork. Okay, now let's get into Quinni. Quinn Gallagher-Jones, also known as Quinni, is longtime best friends with Darren Rivers and later on Amory Wadia. And then in season 2, they add a couple more people to the friend group, but for all of season 1, it's those core 3. She's a fashion icon. The fashion in the show is like, it's fashion to the max, and I think Quinni's outfits fit in perfectly with like the other clothes they're wearing at Hartley, but it's very colorful and loud and rainbowy, sparkly, things like that. Her favorite book series is called Angeline of the Underworld. She loves drawing, photography, writing, and animals. I'm not sure if everyone knows that she is autistic, but she does come out to people as autistic in the show and doesn't seem to necessarily hide who she is. Given a lot of the context clues that we get in just the general way that Quinni goes about living her life, I get the sense that she was probably diagnosed as a child and not like in her high school years. She's living in an environment where her autism is accepted and accommodated. Her dads are very supportive of her and are there on the sidelines as she navigates difficult scenarios. She has like really good self-management skills. Like, I don't know if that's a phrase that gets used very often, but she's like pretty self-sufficient and knows herself really well, knows how to take care of herself. She has a morning routine that she follows every day. She has headphones that she wears when she gets overstimulated. She knows when she is going to be overwhelmed and tries the best she can to prepare for that. Like, she she has a lot of knowledge about herself, and that's one of the reasons why I think she was probably diagnosed as a child, maybe like got certain therapies, and had support to get her to where she is today. And she's pretty confident in herself. She has her moments where she's insecure and worried about what other people think about her, but in general, like, she just kind of acts the way Quinny acts, and you know doesn't apologize for it, doesn't try to hide it, and just acts unapologetically herself. We also see her struggling with sensory issues. There's a scene where she's putting on fake eyelashes, and that starts freaking out. It's like, no, take them off, which most relatable content. I'm gonna try to see if I can find a picture of me wearing fake eyelashes, but I oh my god. Like, even just thinking about wearing fake eyelashes is, ugh, never again. I hate fake eyelashes so much. They're so uncomfortable. Um so that was just like one tiny little funny detail. We also see her get overstimulated in loud, crowded environments. There's a scene where she is at a restaurant and they amplify the noises like all around the restaurant to be the same level or even like louder than the person who is sitting across from her and talking to her, and it really highlights the way that she can hear the person talking to her but has a hard time like making out what they're saying or being able to respond in a way that isn't just kind of like nodding and saying yeah. But it also shows that she isn't completely unaware of what's going on around her. It just makes it a lot harder to, kind of focus and stay calm. We also see her sensory issues getting worse when she is emotionally overwhelmed or upset. If there's like something going on in her life or with her friends or partners, and she starts getting stressed about it, you can see her in real time, like noises around her start getting louder. I think that's a really interesting detail that, it doesn't have to be about the external environment. It can be about the internal triggers too, and that can like bleed into the way that we process sensory information. On that same vein, Quinny is like an open book. She wears her emotions out on her sleeve. You can see when Quinny is upset. She, stops making eye contact. She starts stimming by like flapping her hands around or like, wringing her hands and just like, having these very like rigid movements. And usually her answers to questions are very like, one word, shutting down the conversation, not engaging in any more talk than needs to be done. And we also see her in times of extreme stress, particularly in the aftermath of a large meltdown, not being able to speak at all. I think there are a few different words that we could use for this experience. I've seen some discourse about like whether or not the word nonverbal should be used for people who don't speak at all or people who are minimally verbal. Quinny most of the time is able to talk, but she does have this one period of time in the show where she doesn't talk for multiple days and is triggered by something very emotional. We could call it maybe like selective mutism or situational mutism. We could call it verbal shutdown. The word that they use in the show is nonverbal, so we'll just say that. But I wanted to make you guys aware that I'm not really sure of the terminology on that. We also see from the very beginning of the show, like the first scene that Quinny is in, is that she has she has a big heart, and she cares so deeply about others and is willing to go against the grain and make friends with people who are outcasts. In episode 1, there's a scene where Darren is shit talking someone, and Quinny calls them out on it and is like, hey, you can't say that, that's really mean. And they continue talking about this person, and they're saying, like, why do you even, like, want to talk to them? And she says, haven't you ever felt like a total reject? I think showcasing Quinny's empathy first was a very strategic move done by the writers, and I applaud them for it. I think it did what it was supposed to do, because there is a very prevalent misconception that autistic people don't have empathy, that, you know, they aren't able to put themselves in other people's shoes, they can't feel the same emotions as others, they can't pick up on that. And just having those scenes where Quinny is like the most caring person in the show, those all come before the audience finds out that she's autistic, and that meant the world to me personally, because the first time that we, the audience, find out for sure that Quinny is autistic, she is coming out to a character in the show about it, and that character's response is word for word, but you're like really emotionally intelligent. And I think that hits the nail on the head of why the writers did that. And that character can kind of be the voice for like all the other people in the audience thinking the same thing, and being able to highlight that there's so much that the general public gets wrong about autism. When I was around Quinny's age, I was told by a professional that I couldn't be autistic because I had a great deal of empathy. So it's something that a lot of people, even professionals, believe. But if you watch the first episode and, like, you know, all the other scenes until we find out that Quinny's autistic, you can see the autistic traits if you know what you're looking for. But a lot of people just kind of ignore things like that because they don't think it's possible. Like, oh, this person cares about people, they can't be autistic. Like, no, you don't know anything about autism. So I hope that this was kind of a little bit of a shock for some people and a wake-up call when they were watching it, and introduce them to new information that they hadn't known. Because as silly as it sounds, like, people believe that. Throughout the series, we see Quinny fail to pick up or abide by different implicit social rules. This includes different slang words used for sex, being very blunt and like not mincing her words, needing to clarify like the details of a conversation before like walking away and like knowing what the conversation was about. There's this great scene in episode 1 where she is confronting a character about a rumor that A, wasn't true, and B, was ignorant and inaccurate. So she decides to confront this person and try to educate them about why it was inaccurate, and just like try to give this person the knowledge that they need to, you know, fix their ways. And it turns into this whole big thing where this character gets absolutely roasted by Quinny, and everyone starts laughing, and Quinny's just like looking around, like not really sure like what's so funny, because, you know, to her she's just telling the truth. And honestly, I agree. Like, why isn't anyone else calling out this character on their bullshit? Like, why is everyone just like so content with, like, you know, letting this person just spread weird rumors that don't even make sense? You know, she had every right to do that, but everyone was so shocked by it. But for Quinny, it was just another normal Friday. Like, Quinny isn't completely incapable of picking up on social cues. However, the social cues that she does pick up on, she picks them up in a very like rigid, pragmatic, oversimplified way. For example, one character compliments her and she says, "I can tell by the tone of your voice that you don't mean that." So having specific techniques to tell what someone means when they're saying something, such as the tone of their voice. And she's aware of when she does miss things, or she can see that there's some other hidden meaning that she doesn't understand. And I think that's another misconception about autistic people that I hope this character kind of opens them up to see, that being autistic doesn't mean you're completely oblivious. A lot of times, autistic people know that they're doing something wrong, but they just don't know what. Or they know that they're missing something, but they can't identify what it is or why it is that they can't get things on the same level as non-autistic people can. Quinni is a very passionate and driven person. When the school has a competition to see who can pick up the most trash, and the prize at stake is a PlayStation gift card voucher, Quinni hones in on it and she's like, "I'm gonna be the trash queen. Like, nobody is going to ruin this opportunity for me." And she's like, pushing people out of the way in order to get trash so she can win that gift voucher. There's also a mystery in season 2 that needs to be solved, and she goes full investigator mode and commits to it very hard. In the very first episode, we even see this where she has a question about a remark that someone else makes, and she spends the entire night researching it and putting together a binder of research to educate this person. And we also see her being very, very dedicated to her friends. She has a close connection with her friends and is super loyal, and once you're on her good side and she cares about you, she will quite literally die for you if it comes to it. I loved seeing the passionate part of her character that is very focused on one thing, because a huge part of autism is what is called restrictive and repetitive behaviors, or RRBs. This can be like, focusing on one topic very, very intently. If it's kind of a more chronic thing, the modern autistic community usually calls that a special interest. In addition to, like, those instances of, like, being very hyperfixated on one thing, like I was just talking about, Quinni very much does have a special interest in the book series Angeline of the Underworld. It means a lot to her. She kind of interprets her world through identifying with Angeline, who is a demon, who's also like a feminist and like a girl boss. I don't know all the lore behind Angeline, but I know that she is very near and dear to Quinni, and she gets a lot of joy out of engaging with the fandom and making art about Angeline, going to fandom events, and being able to engage with her special interest. A couple other little details that are a lot subtler, but I think are really interesting and just goes to show how much like authentic input Chloé Hayden was able to give the writers to put into the character. Quinni is a lesbian, and there is a much higher incidence of being queer in the autism community. And she also takes meds. This is referenced multiple times throughout the series, but it's never specified for what. It's never like, oh, Quinni has depression or anxiety or, this or that. It's just kind of like an offhand comment a couple times, but it makes sense because autistic people have, more often than not, have comorbid disorders, whether it be psychiatric, psychological, or medical. So, those meds could really be about anything, but that's just like the tiniest little subtle detail that shows like how how well they got a lot of this stuff down, and I appreciate it. Okay, season 1. Let's talk about the infantilization that Quinni experiences from that one particular character. If you've seen the show, you know who I'm talking about. So, this storyline starts off with this particular character not having a great like baseline understanding of autism to begin with. They say that they are going to do research, and we see this person put in a little bit of effort. We see them make accommodations for Quinni in a school setting. Quinni thinks that's really sweet, but as time goes on, we sort of see this pattern of this person making assumptions about Quinni's needs and taking matters into their own hands continue. Particularly when it comes to choices around drugs and alcohol, and speaking on behalf of Quinni when she hasn't even been consulted. Also, this person is just rude in general and doesn't even realize it. Like, there's a scene where they tell Quinni, you know, I'm gonna come to this party with you, and then never shows up, and she says, I know how much routine means to you, and Quinni's like, oh my god, it is a shitty thing to be stood up by anybody. And it's just wild that like this character does not, like, that has not computed. Like, you know, Quinni isn't just upset because she's autistic, she's upset because you stood her up. And the culmination of these, you know, subtle attitudes that are slowly building happens in season 1, episode 6, titled Angeline. I'm gonna try to figure out a way to express the sheer rage that I feel about what goes down in this episode and try to explain it for the people who have not seen it, because luckily, I think across the board, viewers, at least, like, you know, from the reactions that I've seen, I think the audience pretty much has the same reaction to this person's actions and attitudes in this episode. And that's really refreshing to see because, you know, these are things that neurotypical or allistic or non-autistic people do to autistic people. And I think it must have been like a really good job in the writer's room and in the editing and in the acting, because I think they elicited exactly the emotion that we're supposed to get to sympathize with Quinni in the situation. Quinni has this really big fandom event coming up. It is the release of a new Angeline of the Underworld book, and the author is going to be doing a book signing at a bookstore downtown. It's going to be this huge event. People are cosplaying. You know, there are lines around the block to get in. Quinni has a friend in the fandom that she is looking forward to meeting up with. This person invites themselves to the event without Quinni's permission. Quinni didn't ask them. They just said, "Oh, I'll come along. It'll be fun. I'll do this with you." And kind of derails the whole day. First of all, nobody invited you. Second of all, you repeatedly asked Quinni if the both of you could go partying together afterwards, and every single time Quinni clearly communicated that she did not want to, that she would not feel up to it. And this character just brushes it off and tries to diminish Quinni's feelings and clearly doesn't understand the reasons behind Quinni saying no. She's saying things like, you know, I know myself, I know I'm going to be really worked up about this, I'm going to need to like decompress afterwards, I'm not going to feel like being in a social environment. And this character just goes, are you overthinking it? Because I think you're overthinking it. Like, how fucking invalidating is that? Um, it goes back to what I said earlier on in the video about Quinny being able to manage herself just fine. She has a really good understanding of her needs and is able to rely on past experiences to know how she is going to react in new situations and what she needs to be able to get through that. And that just got thrown out the window and dismissed and disrespected. And I think this wasn't an intentional thing. This wasn't like an intentional decision to be disrespectful from this person, but it just goes to show like how little they care about Quinny in the long run and how they care about their own wants and their own desires more than they do about Quinny's actual needs. Quinny was clearly communicating her needs. The questions should have stopped after she said no the first time. That's the basic rule of consent. Like, the fact that she thought that she was going to be able to convince Quinny to come out with her afterwards is just so weird and disrespectful. Third of all, this character derails the schedule that Quinny has planned for the day. This girl has been planning this for months. It is like the single most exciting day of her life. She is going to be in special interest heaven. She's going to be surrounded by a community of supportive fans and peers who understand her interest on the same level as she does. She is ready to be independent and go through this alone. That was her original plan. And like I said, this person invited themselves. And then they decided, okay, we're going to switch it up a little bit. I swear, we'll be quick at this coffee shop. I promise on my life, I will get you to that book signing. Like, it was never about getting on time to the book signing. It was about being derailed from her routine. And this idea kind of comes up in season 2 as well, where characters are expressing their disdain for Quinny's insistence on routine and sameness. This is a very real thing. A hallmark of autism is restrictive and repetitive behaviors. So this can be a disability. This did not have to be a fucking disability on this day. Quinny was supposed to have the time of her life, and this person decided that, you know, they wanted to, I don't know, I guess teach Quinny to be flexible and challenge her on this day. Like, there was no reason for that. You shouldn't even be here right now. Like, just let Quinny have fun, and you know, the whole world doesn't have to revolve around Quinny. So maybe on another day when you're doing something you know, less Quinny centered, you can switch up the routine a little bit and bring her to this coffee shop some other time. It was not necessary. There was no need. And the fact that she thought she had to insert herself into Quinny's life and shake things up and disregard the fact that, you know, Quinny does have a disability that will make that harder for her is disrespectful. And in the aftermath of this decision, when they go to this coffee shop, Quinny shuts down. You can see it, you know, she says she's very quiet, she's stimming, she says, I don't really feel like eating. Then they just so happen to run into an old friend of this person's, and they start talking, and Quinny is withdrawn, obviously, because she is distressed about the fact that her schedule was thrown off. And this character has the audacity to talk about Quinny not even behind her back, like in front of her face, to this person and say, yeah, she's kind of like on the spectrum. Like, excuse me? You are supposed to care about this person. Like, what good is talking about them like that in front of strangers going to do? Like, that's not giving a good impression of her. First of all, you didn't even have to say that. Second of all, if you really felt like you had to explain Quinni's behavior, you know, there are more respectful and less patronizing or demeaning ways to get that across. You know, you could say, I'm sorry, she's having a little bit of a hard time right now. They get to the event. She does not respect the culture of what's going on at all. When they show up and she sees that everyone is cosplaying just like Quinni is, she's like put off by that and like, oh my god, people really do this, and isn't very interactive when Quinni introduces her to one of her fandom friends and then is on her phone the whole time during the actual event. And you can see how much Quinni is lighting up simply by being there. And this person isn't even present to see that because they don't want to be here. Like, you're the one who decided to be here. You literally didn't have to. Quinni didn't want you here in the first place. Like, you're not doing her any favors by being here and showing her how disrespectful you're being. She also later on openly makes fun of the fandom and says being packed in a crowded room with a bunch of sweaty fangirls isn't exactly my kind of night out. Just, there is no need for that. There is no need for that. Like, it's so sad to think that people actually do this and that people take it because, you know, maybe those are the only quote unquote supportive people in their life, or maybe they're the only, you know, people in their life, period, but they're just really disrespectful. Luckily, Quinni knows her worth, and even though this is an extremely, extremely upsetting thing for her that, you know, sets her back for days and days, you know, she has this awful, awful meltdown when she gets home where she's like screaming, crying, rocking on the floor, having some like self-injurious behaviors like hitting her head, can't talk for days. Even though like that was a very distressing thing and she didn't deserve that, Quinni knows, I think Quinni knows that she didn't deserve that, and that's why it was so distressing. You know, she calls this person out on the nasty things that that they're saying to her, and calling out what she's really trying to say. You know, this person says, sometimes I just want to be like a normal teenager, and Quinni knows how to read between the lines in these types of situations. It isn't like she's oblivious to what's going on. She knows that she's being disrespected, and she says, so I'm not normal enough for you. The audacity of the response to that. Don't pull the fucking autism card. You know what I meant. What did you mean? You can't just say that's not what I meant when you're trying to brush over something offensive that is actually... Wow, I spent like 15 minutes talking about that episode. Just to wrap it up really quickly, moral of the story, listen to your autistic loved ones. Watch this episode for a crash course in how not to treat your autistic loved ones. And I'm really happy that it had such a strong visceral reaction for a lot of the audience because, like I said earlier, that's really refreshing to see because some people might slip into this without even knowing. So having it displayed out in the open in such a negative light and to have that negative reaction evoked in just the general population, I think is really beneficial because it can get people on that neurodiversity affirming side, whereas, if they didn't see something like that, maybe they would start veering to the other side. Now on to season 2. Before we really get into the meat of the autism representation, I'm going to need to give a little bit of context and just a quick rundown of the season 2 plot. So, there is a mystery to be solved. The solving of this mystery directly impacts Quinni's friend group, so she takes it upon herself to be the official investigator, the detective. And at first her friends think this is a little corny, but as the season goes on, they get more into it and are fully supportive of Quinni's efforts to help solve this mystery because, like I said, this directly affects them, some of them more than others, and they actively participate in Quinni's efforts to solve this mystery. Unfortunately, during the course of this mystery, Quinni suffers a traumatic event and consequentially has to take some time off of school. Her way of dealing with this traumatic event is by getting even more immersed and more fixated on solving this mystery. She is very narrowed in, tunnel vision. This is like the only thing she can think about, and her friends start to get worried about her. They go to visit her. As soon as she starts talking about new potential ways of getting closer to unraveling the mystery, they are concerned for her, and think that it's a problem that she is so focused on this instead of focusing on recovering from this traumatic event. Their concern is definitely warranted in some ways. Quinni ends up marching her way into school when she's supposed to be home to continue to figure out the mystery. The teachers are not happy about this. Her friends are not happy about this. And they can see that Quinni is distressed about it, and won't stop until she finds out the answer. Quinni's friends start planning a little bit of an intervention for her. Her birthday is coming up, and they want to plan a day that is completely mystery-free to take her mind off of things and get her to realize that there's more to life than solving this mystery. So they plan out this whole surprise day for her, full of her favorite things. They all dress up like frogs. Quinni has a pet frog. They go to the zoo, which usually would be one of Quinni's favorite places to go. Keep in mind, Quinni has taken some time off of school, and during this period of time, she's missed out on a few things. Her friends have been trying to leave her alone because they want her to focus on her recovery and don't want to draw her into anything too dramatic or put any pressure on her that doesn't need to be put on her. This is well intentioned, but when Quinni starts to realize how much she has missed out on, she freaks out. This day that is supposed to be relaxing for her and a way to de-stress, even though it has, what her friends thought would be good for her, very much becomes not a good day for her. She's not having a good time like her friends expected her to and wanted her to. They didn't get the response that they were expecting. What ends up happening is Quinni has this meltdown of sorts in front of them where she starts trying to explain to them why she is so focused on this mystery and starts getting really upset and crying about it. She feels like she's being left out of the friend group, Things are happening too fast for her. The social dynamics are changing and she doesn't know how to deal with it, so she decided to focus her efforts on this one thing that would be useful for everyone and made her feel like she was helpful and made her feel connected to her friends. And now all of a sudden they're telling her that they want her to stop, and they've been living their own lives without her while she's been out of school. This monologue that she has, where she breaks down, is mostly about the rift that she is feeling between her and her friends. I will also add, I think suffering that traumatic event added a layer of stress and a layer of autistic compensation to the whole situation, where here's one more big thing that's changing. Here's one thing that she doesn't want to think about. All she wants is to focus on this mystery, to take her mind off of things. Having hyperfixations can be a beautiful thing. Having hyperfixations can also be an ugly thing, a really stressful thing, if it isn't handled in a healthy way. I think autistic people and people who have ADHD, because of their attention problems and being able to focus on one thing for a very long time, we are at a higher risk of having kind of maladaptive relationships with what it is that we spend our time doing. And I think the stress of it all can really be bi-directional, or like in a feedback loop, where someone might be stressed about external circumstances in their life, so then they turn to their special interest or their hyperfixation, or find something new to focus on, and maybe something about that piece of their lives, the special interest, the hyperfixation, gets distressing, so then they become even more stressed, which in turn exacerbates how they feel about the world in general, and then it just goes back to that, and we can get into a spiral pretty quickly, in my experience at least. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but the traumatic event she experienced was in a way related to the mystery that she was solving, and it kind of hindered the process. I think her friends kind of made it out to be more intertwined with the mystery than it really was. The traumatic event was more of an aftermath and not a direct cause of Quinni's efforts to solve the mystery, but nonetheless it was related. So when Quinni has to take time to recover and decompress, she was already beforehand in that hyper-focused mode where she was focusing on one thing. So now that she's being taken away from her opportunity to figure out that one thing and engage with it, she's trying even harder and overcompensating. It's just a whole very complicated situation, and her friends didn't know about any of this. They didn't have the perspective to understand why Quinni might not be amenable to stopping thinking about the mystery. They might not understand that she can't stop thinking about the mystery. Like that's going to be really hard for her. So when they take her to the zoo, like she's not going to be able to take her mind off of these things really easily. And that's something that I think a lot of neurotypical, I'm not even saying like allistic or non-autistic, I'm just saying neurotypical in general, like people who don't have like specific different patterns of thinking. I think that's something that neurotypical people can sometimes have a hard time understanding, and they might not get if someone is fixated on one thing. And, if someone has OCD, if someone has autism, if someone has ADHD, an anxiety disorder, PTSD, like, it's really hard for someone to break out of that. So it isn't just as easy as saying, okay, Quinny, we're gonna get you out of the house and doing something else. Like, yes, that's a good start, but it's not going to fix her problems. It's not going to take away this burden, because it really can be a burden sometimes, of having this kind of obsessive way of interpreting the world and going about living life. That's just kind of how her brain is wired. And it's great that she has friends that care. At the same time, it's sad to see that, how much they cared wasn't really enough in this situation. Speaking to the support that they gave her up until she gave that speech to them and ran off crying. Afterwards is a little bit of a different story. I'm not going to say all her friends turned on her, but the dynamics are a little bit different. So Quinny runs off crying. Obviously, she's very overwhelmed. Her closest friend goes and follows her and talks to her about what's going on. They ask her, how long she's been feeling this, and she says a while, but she didn't want to burden anyone with it. And they do an okay job of trying to show that they're affirming her feelings and validating the things that she's saying. But then they say things like, I get that, that makes sense. But then at the same time, right after that, they follow it up with, I just don't know what we're supposed to do about any of that. I could be wrong, I don't want to speak for Quinny, but if I were Quinny in this situation and I were feeling this way, I don't think I would necessarily be looking for my friends to be able to do something about it. I have a disability. It makes life hard. Life is all about change, and things are going to keep changing and moving forward and evolving, and that's just a hard fact of life that is hard for Quinny and I to swallow. I think you can see during this interaction that some of Quinny's feelings aren't really based in rationality, and that's okay. Quinny says to this friend something along the lines of, everything's changing and I don't like it. And they ask her, so do you want like the changes that our friend group has made to be undone? Like, do you want these people out of the friend group? And she says, no, that's not it. I guess I just want things to slow down a little bit. So you can see that, like, she was going towards one place, and then when she realized it wasn't reasonable, she kind of stepped back, because it isn't reasonable to expect that things will be the same as they were in the past. But that doesn't take away the fact that she's feeling upset about it and that it's hard for her. And I think that disconnect is really what makes this conversation go in the direction that it ends up going in, because this friend seems to be accusing Quinny of expecting the world to revolve around her, when that's not the case. Quinny is just having a hard time coping. She didn't ask for anything from her friends, except for just let her solve her mystery in peace. She wasn't asking for things to go in a backwards direction. And she kept this to herself because she didn't want to burden anyone about it. She probably didn't want to make anyone feel like that she was asking them to do something that wasn't reasonable. There is a concept that has been recently emerging in autism research known as the double empathy problem. And I think having an understanding of the double empathy problem is really key in understanding like the dynamics at play in this situation of Quinni being misunderstood by her friends and then going through this large rift and then series of events that happens. I mentioned earlier that there is this very common misconception that autistic people can't experience empathy. Um, we can just broadly define empathy as basically being able to feel what other people feel and understand their point of view. To kind of combat that reductive view of autism that frankly can make us out to seem like robots, researchers have now been trying to counteract that and come up with a theory that still makes sense within the framework of what we know about like the neurodevelopmental condition autism and how it works. So the double empathy problem came out of that, and basically it's just the idea that autistic people understand autistic people and neurotypical people understand neurotypical people, and that there are two kind of different subcultures, you could say, where there's a bigger divide and it's harder for each one to empathize with the other. It's not a matter of the autistic person having a deficit. It's a matter of neurotypicals have a hard time understanding the autistic people as well, and it goes both ways. It's nobody's fault. And I think the double empathy problem is really what comes into play when Quinni's friends are misunderstanding her or judging her harshly for having these feelings around the change that's naturally going to happen in their lives. Her friend tells her that she needs better ways of coping, ways that aren't going to put her in danger. Quinni's friend says to her during this conversation, "The world can't always play by your rules." And Quinni's immediate response is, "My rules? The world has never played according to my rules. I've spent my entire life playing by yours and pretending that they make the tiniest bit of sense when they don't." And I think that's a perfect highlight of that double empathy problem and the work that autistic individuals may have to put in order to just functionally exist in a non-autistic society, and how when it is difficult for them to do that, neurotypicals or allistics see that, have a hard time understanding that point of view and understanding like why that isn't so easy like it is for them. This further gets highlighted when she's saying this and saying that like she spent her whole life trying to pretend that all these rules make sense to her, and her friend says, "So stop trying. Literally nobody's asking you, stop trying." And this is what kind of sets Quinni off on the rest of her journey in the season. That kind of abrupt like nobody's asking you to do this type thing, when that was what she's kind of been trained to do her whole life, to mask, to fit in with society, and to have someone extremely close to her tell her that they don't, that it's not good enough for them, and they don't want her to even like try because it's inconveniencing them. Her response to this now starts swinging in the extreme opposite direction. Throughout season 1 and season 2, like up until this point, just like going by her behavior up until this point, I had a lot of respect for the way Quinni presented herself. I'm not saying that I don't respect her after this happened. Hear me out, but like the one consistent way that she was presenting herself I thought was really admirable, because I felt like she embraced her autistic identity and didn't really try too hard to hide it. And some people might see that as not masking, and that's kind of the feeling that I got, that like, oh, Quinni's unmasked. Unmasked is a generalization. But then seeing Quinni switch her behavior and noticing like the marked differences in like how she's acting, how she's treating others, highlighted the concept of autistic masking for me in a way that I hadn't really thought about before. Like for Quinni, masking wasn't just about pretending she wasn't autistic. For her, masking was being agreeable to everyone and still being herself, while also keeping in mind that she shouldn't be a burden on other people. And if she is being a burden on people, to tone that down and to not let her emotions get in the way of things, not let her negative emotions get in the way of everyone else around her having a good time, or being inconvenienced. She starts acting very differently after this altercation with her friend, partially out of spite, because she was clearly hurt by what the friend said to her. The biggest thing was that she started ignoring her friends. And unmasking does not need to look like ignoring your friends. This is just kind of the journey that Quinni went on. And I hope if there's a season 3, we get to watch Quinni explore what it means to be a good friend and also be herself and be unmasked more, because she went through kind of the trial period towards the end of season 2, I feel like, where she was testing things out and then kind of realized that these things weren't working very well and that she was hurting people. Quinni also started ignoring her responsibilities as well as ignoring her friends. She basically started operating under the idea of, if I don't feel like doing it, then I'm not going to do it, no matter whether or not she had an obligation to do that or not. When she gets pulled into a school event because of a position that she has, her response is, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to. And like, she really has to be forced into doing it, and isn't willing to take on her responsibilities and is just kind of operating by emotion. And I know that there have been a lot of people who have been critical of Quinni and her behavior towards the end of season 2, and I can see why, because it was a very jarring difference. Like, you see Quinni as this very caring, loving, sweet character up until then, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, she doesn't care about anyone anymore and starts treating even the people close to her like they don't matter to her, which I feel like is a fair assumption. But you also have to keep in mind that, she had her identity challenged and now is trying to figure out what her identity looks like and how she is supposed to act if she's rejecting one part of her old behavior. And after a while of doing this and blowing people off and very visually showing that she does not care about anyone or anything. I like to think that she comes to the realization that she is in the wrong and that she's hurting people. There's one particular scene where she is talking with one of her friends and is very flippant about the fact that this friend skipped out on a responsibility of theirs, and Quinny is being salty about it. And what she doesn't realize is, there was some pretty serious stuff going on in that friend's life at the time, and it wasn't that she didn't care about the responsibility. There was an emergency going on, and Quinny wasn't even like present enough for her friend to tell her about it until after the fact, when Quinny is like judging them about it. Um, we get this shot right at the end of that scene where we see Quinny's face just kind of change and like almost like she's about to cry. And I like to think that in that moment she realized what a jerk she was being, and that like her temper tantrum wasn't really worth hurting her friends. The last thing that I will say about Quinny's autism portrayal in season 2 is there was a storyline that involved leadership, and I love that they included this in the discussion. Um, Autistic people can be looked down on a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were lots of people out there who believe that autistic people can't be good leaders, that they don't have the social skills in order to effectively lead a group of people, or that they don't have the strength in order to do that. It's so refreshing to see that not be the case, and to have the light shown on the things that autistic people are good at. And this isn't every autistic person. Some autistic people have really bad social skills, in the way that they are kind of closed in on themselves, and don't focus on the needs of other people. I get the sense that Quinny is a very like bottom up processor and understands her world through observing things first and just kind of like fitting the pieces together that way, and then later on coming to generalizations about the world that way, instead of a top down process where someone is projecting their idea of the world onto the world, whether or not the world is whether that's an accurate whether that's accurate or not. And during the storyline, I think Quinny highlights that, and says, is able to call some people out and say, you're just gonna try to force other people to play by your rules, and that's not okay. And seeing her kind of get a taste of that celebration of autistic strengths and skills and talents was refreshing. Leadership skills are something that I put a lot of stock into. I've spent a huge part of my life aspiring to be a good leader and learn what it is to be a leader, and figuring out how to implement that in my own life. And it was great to see someone that I saw myself in as autistic have those potentially same leadership skills and strengths that I have, and see it be recognized by people and celebrated even. That being said, and this is going to come back around to the double empathy problem, I am a little wary of glorifying autism and saying that, like, oh, Quinny is better than anyone else because she is autistic. I think that way of thinking, believing that autism is supreme and more superior than being non-autistic, or even being autistic and more severely like disabled by it, can be a dangerous thing, kind of bordering on Aspie supremacy. Aspie supremacy is the idea that people with Asperger's syndrome, which is no longer a diagnosis in the US. It now falls under autism in the DSM-5, but it is a label still used by a lot of the world in the ICD, I believe. The idea that people with Asperger's are superior to autistic people who do not have the Asperger's label, or even just people in general that do not have Asperger's. Just kind of viewing Asperger traits as a superpower that makes you better than everyone else. And I just want to caution people against that and call out that, this is just one story. Quinny has strengths, and it's really amazing to see those strengths celebrated. On the other hand, I don't think those are strengths that only autistic people have. I think, neurotypical people can also be good leaders. It's not like autism has a monopoly on the leadership division. Like, that's not how the world works. And autism does have a lot of ugly downsides to it, some of which I was talking about only a few minutes ago. Like, Quinny, at the same time as the storyline is going on, Quinny is completely ignoring her friends and neglecting responsibilities. So I just wanted to put that out there for nuance, and to bring that kind of criticism and critical thinking lens into the conversation. But like, I don't know how to describe like the joy that gave me to see that storyline, because leadership is something that is so special to me and something that I value a lot. And for a lot of my life, I thought, if I'm an introvert, I have to work harder at being a good leader. Or later on down the line, if I am autistic, then I have to work harder at being a good leader. But having it acknowledged that maybe because of my autism, I have some strengths that I bring to the table, just like Quinny does. That was really special to see. And I know it was a small storyline that, only got highlighted in a couple of episodes. But I think the bottom line from that is to appreciate each person for their personhood and for the things that make them unique, and learn how to view those things as good things while working with the bad. Okay, wrapping up the video with some final thoughts and some more of my own personal feelings towards Quinni in Heartbreak High. I see so much of myself in her, and to have that autistic label attached to it is, I think, really groundbreaking. And having autism portrayed in such an honest and generally positive light is something that I haven't seen a lot of before. One of my other favorite TV shows is Everything's Gonna Be Okay. It was a freeform show directed by Josh Thomas. It had Kayla Cromer in it, starring as one of the autistic characters, and I think that show also did a pretty good job of representing autism. However, I think it represented a part of the autistic experience that I don't have, which is including having higher support needs and being in special education at school, growing up with a diagnosis. I'm guessing Quinni grew up with a diagnosis too, but and that show also highlighted a lot of the uglier parts of autism in an honest light, but I would say that in part of the show's trajectory, and this was probably on purpose, some autistic traits were portrayed in a more negative light than positive. Another show with an autistic woman, an autistic teenage girl, where the story is very different. The characters are very different. And the representation is also accurate, but pretty different. It just means the world to me. And when the show first came out, I thought a lot about what would have happened if I had this show when I was around like ages 13 or 14. You know, what if I watched this when I was growing up and saw myself in Quinni and was able to be like, oh, we're like really similar. And then to like kind of get my mind blown by the fact she was autistic, because I viewed autism in a very different way when I was younger. Like, I would have taken one look at Quinni and been like, no, she's not autistic. Like, that's not how autistic people act. I think Heartbreak High is going to do that for a lot of people, and just having accurate representation is so important. And this is why, because it spreads information, it changes opinions, it moves the world forward in a way that, in a more informal way than education does, because general education doesn't really teach you much about the experiences of disabled people. If you go to higher education or college or university and study some of these things, even then you're going to get a lot of inaccurate representations and some like base level, possibly outdated knowledge surrounding them. So having accurate representation in the form of entertainment distributed to the masses on such a huge platform like Netflix is just so huge. And just imagine like how many lives are being changed by the fact that this show has an autistic character, and that the writers and developers took time to talk with the autistic actor to create a role that was authentic, and actually hired and went out seeking an autistic actor for this role. It's just really special, and I am thankful for Quinni. I am thankful for Chloé Hayden. I am thankful for the writers, developers, directors, etc., of Heartbreak High and the care that they put into this show, not only for the autistic representation, but for all of the other representation across the board that they've done. Non-binary representation, queer representation, indigenous representation, asexual representation, like all these topics that they cover in an entertaining way. Like, it really matters. It's really important work, and there's not really much else I can say. If you have not watched Heartbreak High, and if you have access to Netflix and are okay with watching some mature themes, go watch Heartbreak High. It's okay to stop. The show's not for everyone, but like what they were able to do with Quinni was and is so beautiful, and I'm so glad that I get to witness it at the time that it is coming out, and I hope that this goes down as a huge step in the autistic community, in the disabled community. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this. Let me know your thoughts on the character of Quinni and her different storylines in the comments. And yeah, thanks for watching. Adeline out. Bye!